Without objection, I'm going to move past the approval of minutes. Unless there is discussion, we will just save the approval and discussion for next meeting. Any objection?
No.
Hearing none, we'll just move to our item number 3, which is to discuss. Oh, that's the meeting summary of August 2nd. Did we not? Okay, sorry. I believe approved the minutes of the August 2nd meeting at our previous meeting. That is item number 3 on our agenda. So we will move past that to item number 4 on the agenda, which is a discussion of short-term rentals. So I will briefly introduce the subject and then we'll open up for discussion. So we have chosen to discuss this item out of some concern that short-term rentals are biting into our long-term rentals in town, that short-term rentals are potentially being bought by entities that want to do business in town, further decreasing our rentals and potentially increasing the price of home ownership. There's also concerns about how short-term rentals have effects on neighborhoods within our town. So I, as you know, and whoever else is listening knows, I put together a proposed policy that was just for discussion only, that was based on some proposals that were put through in Nantucket and also on the law that is in place in Lenox. But before we discuss it, if we discuss it at all, I thought that it'd be a good idea for us to discuss the purpose, what we hope to accomplish with potentially putting together a policy, why we're here talking about this, and any other concerns having to do with short-term rental. So with that, I'll just open it up to the floor. Whoever wants to make a comment.
Well, I wouldn't mind, since I probably have not been to the first or second meetings. This is my first meeting being a panel member. And I would hope to think that why we're meeting is to, as you had said, make some room, if you will, for more affordable housing. And I hope that's what we're going to accomplish in this group, is a way to find ways to maybe do something with the short-term rentals, maybe make it, I think it was the 261 homes possibly available, to at least make a third of them, I would hope, into affordable housing in ways in which we can do this. And that's what I'm hoping comes out of this panel.
Yes. So for me, affordable housing is part of the mix, but it's really housing in general. So it's market rate housing, which does trickle down to affordable housing. So I'm coming from the goal to increase and preserve Great Barrington's entire housing stock for year-round renters and homeowners, while also allowing full-time residents to benefit from short-term rental income so that they can afford to live here. So I see it as a bigger picture of a shortage of housing stock in general that does trickle down into the shortage of affordable housing. So I'll let someone else talk. I have more to say, but I'll leave it up to the others.
You can keep going.
Okay. So, a couple things. I've been looking at a lot of research online, and there's a lot of towns and cities that have kind of delved into this. But really, I think the urgency is in addressing the housing supply shortage and, finding the most impactful way that we can address this housing supply shortage. So, my question is, are we all in agreement that there is a housing supply shortage before we even go down this path? Or, do we need to convince ourselves through data or anything else that there is a housing supply shortage, and that regulating short-term rentals is one way to address this? I know how I feel, but I'm just wondering, the rest of the committee members, if you're still interested in looking at data to convince yourselves that this is something that we should bring forward, or are we in agreement that there is a need for increasing the housing supply shortage. And by regulating short-term rentals, that's one of an impactful way to begin that process. So.
All right, I think I safely speak for all of us, and maybe not, but I'll speak for myself. There's no question there's a shortage. I think the question before us here, and I'd like to kind of stay on point if we could, is whether or not any regulation on short-term rentals will help. Is it, the questions are, what effect are short-term rentals having on the housing stock in general? If we were to regulate them, what would the effects be on the market, on the availability, on the housing stock? What will the behavior of those owners who are currently renting short-term, what would it be? There's no guarantee that these things will come onto the market as long-term rentals. The homes could be sold, which potentially could have effects of either increasing or decreasing the housing supply. I don't think it'll decrease housing supply. The price of housing, not housing supply. But I guess if people decide to sell, there will be more homes on the market available to purchase. So these, I think, are the questions that we should be discussing today. If there's anything else, let's put it on the table.
Yeah, I mean, so as you said, there's a supply issue. It's my opinion that commercial investors are indeed driving up the cost of rents and ownership, and they're driving them out of reach for year-round local residents. So, whether current commercial investors would sell or would move into the long-term rental market, I think either way, we're helping this shortage of housing. So it'll result in increase in housing for home ownership, and it could increase the long-term rental housing stock. So I think there is a definite correlation between regulating through regulating short-term rentals and increasing the housing supply. So I think that this is direct correlation. So that's one of the strong arguments I feel.
So the only evidence that I've seen about rentals in town is that roughly 20% of our rental stock is dedicated to short-term rentals. That's just our rental stock. It's not the total stock of all the homes in town. It's just the stuff that's up for rent. So does that justify as a problem?
Well, I mean, to answer that, so I've gone into AirDNA research, airdna.co. And if you go on that is real-time data that you can call up Gray Barrington, and it's airdna.co if anyone wants to look as I'm talking. So you can call up Gray Barrington. You can see that there's 187 active short-term rentals right now. 91% of that is entire homes.
Can you say that again? There are how many?
Sure. There's 187 active short-term rentals currently in Great Barrington alone.
Right. That's roughly 20%.
Yep. So 171 of those are entire homes and 16 are private homes. The average,
as opposed, wait a minute, private homes as opposed to a public home?
private rooms.
Private rooms, okay.
Yep. So 16 of those are private rooms and 171 are entire homes. So there's 187 active rentals short-term.
Okay, so go on.
So that data does not agree with the state registry. The state registry has 178 short-term rentals registered. Of those, about 25 of those are Airbnb, not Airbnb, but bed and breakfast or hotels or motels.
Well, this app scans rental channels. So this is real time, this isn't relying on people to register. This is showing that, they're scanning at real time. So you can have the ability to look on the map as I am right now and zoom in and find those 187 units. So I trust this actually more. It's showing me that 57% are listed on Airbnb of those. 20% is listed on VRBO, and 23 of those are listed on both. So I think this is something that can be relied on more so than relying on someone to register the property. But either way, there's 10 homes that we're talking about in a difference, Jonathan. If you want to go with
Yeah, and the total amount again is in that 20% of all rental stock.
Yeah, but
ballpark.
Yeah, so there's 187 short-term rentals. So if you think about it, that's potentially 187 long-term rentals that could be out there to people. And seeing that there's a 0% rental occupancy, that there are no rentals right now, I think that, we make a big case of saying that there are no rentals available, and yet we can see that 187 active rentals on short-term. So out there.
But there's no way you're going to convert short-term rentals to long-term rentals.
No.
If they're making 3 to 4 times as much money.
Well, that's where regulation
short-term.
comes in. Yeah, so that's why we're having this discussion. So the next question is, if we agree that this is regulating short-term rentals is a way to address this, then we can take the next step. So, I can talk about what I suggest or my opinion, or we can just keep talking about whether the data supports any regulation.
I think regulation is needed. It seems to be one of the ways, or just from the example, that we would allow us a little more homes that are affordable and rentals that are affordable. I think we do need to regulate, which I think is the question you're posing, babe. And I'm curious, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting the reading that you are somewhat skeptical about this, even though it's your question. You have some skepticism in your voice, or no?
To whom are you addressing?
I'm speaking with you. I was
to me, no.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm just asking the question. I think, we have 20% of that, of our housing stock, which is, we don't know how much of it is owner occupied or how much of it is owned by, somebody from out of town, or how much of it is second homeowners. We don't know that. And so my question is just simply, is 20% of a housing stock, is that considered an emergency? I think Lee makes some good points. If it was 50% or if it was 10%, we still have 0% vacancy rate. That's a fact, and that's a good point. So yeah, I'm not skeptical. I'm just asking questions.
It's not 20% of the housing stock. It's 20% of the rental.
Of the rental stock, yes. The rental stock, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Lee,
Yeah.
What are you suggesting?
So, again, looking for the most impactful way to address this housing supply shortage that I feel that is the case in Great Barrington. I would like to discuss enacting or looking at something that involves a primary residency requirement in order to have a short-term rental.
Okay, so we have that in the proposal that I sent out to everybody.
Mm-hmm. So, and, not allowing any non-resident, non-occupied short-term rentals in a residential area unless it is owned by a full-time resident. So I'm not sure. Not allowing
that?
So basically, it would be restricting short-term rental operations to a host's primary residence and not allowing short-term operations to be done by a non-primary resident.
So if someone is a snowbird and goes to Florida for 4 months of the year or 6 months of the year, they couldn't rent that? Is that what
No.
you're saying?
No. So basically then allowing for primary residents to, by right, to rent out rooms or secondary units of their property by right. So we're talking about commercial investors, not primary residents. So for primary residents by right, they would be, allowed to rent, rooms and secondary units, is it in a residential area. But
right, but to John's point though, a snowbird would likely make their primary residence in Florida.
Yep.
So this wouldn't be their primary residence here. So according to what you're saying, they wouldn't be allowed to rent their home for the 6 months that they're not here.
Well, then, yeah, we're trying to create, for primary residents, we're trying to give them the opportunity to rent for, let's say, a longer term. So whether it's, 3 months, to do that, to go and live elsewhere. So I'm focused on allowing primary residents to do as they right. So
what's your logic? What's your logic for enacting this idea in relationship to getting more rentals on the market?
So basically, it's to free up more housing. So if there's if there's non-primary rentals, short-term rentals right now, ideally that they would come back onto the market. They would make a decision whether to come back as a long-term rental or they would sell their property and it would return back into the housing stock so that the overall increase of housing would occur in Great Barrington.
Well, I don't have, I have I'm skeptic that this would convert, this or really any regulation would necessarily convert anything to a long-term rental. I think that people who are involved with short-term rentals are doing it not only for the monetary kickback, but also because of the state requirements or state rights that it gives to tenants of long-term rentals. I don't believe that somebody who's renting short-term is going to necessarily switch to a long-term rental. They could do that now, right? And I don't know that they'd want to get involved in the hassle of having to deal with those state regulations. Whether or not the homes come on the market as a new house on the market for sale, that would be, I think, a hope. That would be a good result of the regulation. But yeah. I'm not convinced that I don't know of a good way to turn short-term rentals into long-term rentals. And I don't know that restricting, homes that are vacant anyway, why wouldn't they rent it long-term now? I mean, long-term, they're if let's say they're not here for 6 months out of the year, they leave their home vacant for the winter time. Why wouldn't they rent it during the winter time?
Well, what I'm doing is I'm trying to focus on the full-time Great Barrington resident. So you're bringing it to seasonal. So if we can just, separate the two. So what I'm advocating for is the full-time residents. So the people that can't afford to rent right now, either because the prices are too high or there aren't any rentals. And also those that, wish to move to Great Barrington but can't afford it. So I'm looking at, the fact that many residents are priced out at the moment. So I know you're talking about seasonal residents, but what I like to speak about first before we go into that is full-time residents. So if we allow by right that they can rent, bedrooms in their primary residence, or they can do a secondary unit such as a barn or a guest house year round, that allows, Great Barrington residents to benefit from short-term rentals. So what you're talking about is, and this would allow, if they want to rent their entire home, let's say for up to 90 days, then we're talking about those seasonal snowbirds that you're mentioning. So if they, leave for 3 months in the winter, they can do that. So we're really trying to support full-time residency here. It's my opinion that we're, supporting full-time residency, and we're protecting the long-term residential rental market with something like this. And at the same time, we're discouraging real estate speculation. So, I'm focused on supporting full-time residency and trying to get more people living here full-time. You're talking about, kind of wealthy people that have, residence somewhere else and choose maybe 6 months to use it as a seasonal home. So, but they're claiming their, domicile somewhere else. So I'm focused on supporting full-time residents here.
I'd like to
Sure,
say,
but what you're proposing though is not limiting full-time residents to do anything that they can't already do today.
Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to regulate it so that investors cannot rent short-term rentals in residential areas. So part of the discussion I wanted to segue into is by restricting investors of operating short-term rentals in residential areas. So that's
okay. So again, what I get, if I understand you correctly, you want to limit short-term rentals only to people who have primary residency in town.
yes.
Yeah. So basically what I'm saying is, and this is all discussion. So, establish 2 types of short-term rental licenses depending on the use of the property. So there's a short-term primary rental license, which is owner occupied. So it's a full-time resident. And the second one would be a short-term non-primary rental license. So that's when the owner does not reside at the property.
But that's what the proposal calls out for.
I know, Pedro.
So yeah.
What are you saying? What proposal?
The proposal that I gave everybody to read.
I know, but I'm trying to pull out and not get lost in the weeds. I'm trying to discuss, why we're doing this in.
Okay.
So in general, why are we doing this? So I'm saying that I'm trying to support full-time residency, and I'm trying to restrict investors from operating short-term rentals in residential areas. I don't believe your draft has that, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Not as a
I'd like to say
purpose.
something
No.
when Lee's finished, please.
What does the proposal that you've drafted say about investors?
Well, it doesn't specifically call out anybody.
Okay, does it allow non-primary resident to rent short-term rentals in residential areas? Okay, so what I'm saying is that we don't allow for that.
Right.
So that we restrict.
So then, okay, hold on a minute. I'm a little confused because you said that there was 2 tiers of licensing.
Yes.
So one was for residents and one was for non-residents.
Correct.
Okay, so then that's 2 tiers.
So there's 2 different sets of rules for both groups. So
okay.
So basically, there's one that if you're a resident, full-time Great Barrington resident, this is your domicile. Great Barrington is that, by right, you can short-term rental, bedrooms, secondary units in your home, your primary residence. If you are not a full-time resident, then you cannot do short-term rentals in the residential district. So that's
at all.
That's at all. What I would suggest is that if you aren't a full-time resident, you can operate short-term rentals in industrial zones, business zones, mixed use zones, but not in residential zones. So that's the big difference, I think, from what you've suggested.
Okay, so your goal really is to get developers out of the picture.
Well, to increase the supply of houses for full-time residents. So basically, by freeing up housing in residential areas, we're supporting full-time residency.
So,
There you go. Am I on? Can you not hear me?
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just say something. I agree with what Lee has to say. I also, again, this is my first time to the meeting. Our subcommittee, are we now a subcommittee that's looking to make housing affordable for people in Great Barrington?
We are charged, Garfield, with housing in general.
Okay.
So
So
affordability
housing in general.
in general, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. My thought is, if this is our case, this is our subcommittee, I don't think it's necessary or needed to try to put one person on the spot and make them explain a rational decision that we should all be making because we're all in the same committee. We all have the same goal. And I think if you have some opinions, instead of grilling Lee on her opinions, Pedro, then you need to bring them forward. And Jonathan and Chris and myself, we all need to bring them forward and work together, not grill someone and put them on the spot is how I'm seeing it. And it's how it is. And that's not why we're here. We're here to try to do something and work it together. If you have your opinions, and you should give them and not grill Lee and her opinions. Let's all hear our opinions, what we have to say, and work that way, not put someone on the spot.
All right, Garfield, I don't know how you come to understand things in life, but I like to ask people questions so that I could understand where they're coming from. So if I'm not understanding something that Lee is saying, or if
You have not given
for whatever
any
reason,
opinion,
I'd like to finish my thought. I'd let you finish. If I could finish myself, I would appreciate it. I have questions for Lee. She's coming forth with a proposal. I've got questions. I think that's perfectly normal. That's what we're here for, to discuss. So,
but I don't, well, and I'm telling you, that doesn't work. It is not what it feels like. I'm sitting in the chair I'm sitting in, and I don't hear you offering any positive proposals yourself.
I don't think that I am required to give only positive proposals. I could do basically whatever. I'm a member of this committee, and I could do whatever I want and say whatever I want. I'm not telling you how you should behave, and I think it's unfair for you to tell the rest of us how to behave. So if we can please move on, if we can please, Lee?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to address.
Before you go on, if I in any way offended you, I apologize. I was just asking questions.
No, I absolutely, that's fine. And I'll keep explaining. So just to address Garfield's comment about whether this will reduce our town's already limited supply of affordable housing. I do actually think short-term rentals indirectly, having regulation on short-term rentals will affect the affordable housing supply, because I think that short-term rentals indirectly reduce the housing supply of affordable housing by reducing the overall housing supply. And so there's kind of a cascading effect that, people are being pushed out because the rent prices are too high. And that affects the margins of affordability for low and middle income residents. So I think, with short-term rentals, we are talking about the effect of affordable housing as well. So when you're talking about a shortage of housing, I think, you have the big picture, but it does cascade into, pushing out people of low and middle income residents. So there is a cascading effect, the fact that there is a shortage of housing in general. So I just wanted to say that.
And since you mentioned, if I may, give me 1 second. Since you said we are asking questions, I did ask questions of you, Pedro, and you did not answer them.
What was your question, Garfield?
I asked your opinion. About short-term rentals and our situation in the housing in Great Barrington. I'm asking you that.
Well, my opinion, that's a really general question. I think that there's potential for short-term rentals to be carving into what could be long-term rentals. I think that there's every possibility that we have people investing in properties in town just to function as a business by renting whatever properties they purchase, short-term rentals. I'm not convinced that regulating them will necessarily bring more long-term rentals to the market. And I'm not also convinced that it'll bring new opportunities for purchase for long-term residents to the market, although I am more hopeful that it will do that.
What are you convinced of then, Pedro?
I just gave you my opinion, Garfield. Do you have a question for anybody else? Or
I do.
like
No,
we can
well,
we can carry this
I
on
do have
outside of this meeting. I think that your gripes with me are taking up too much space here. I think the purpose is not how I feel about it. The purpose is how we all as a committee feel about it, and to have a constructive discussion here.
And I asked you a question, Pedro. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just trying, since you said we can ask questions, you gave me an opinion, and I asked you for an answer, but you didn't really have an answer. An opinion and an answer, aren't they different?
Well,
no, they're not.
Just to come back.
You asked my opinion. I gave you my opinion. I mean, geez, what's your opinion? What do you think about short-term rentals?
I think that we probably should put some regulations on short-term rentals because it does affect the housing. It does affect affordable housing in this area. I'm on that committee, as you know, so I think it's important that we. Do you have any proposals, any regulations, any ideas about how we should regulate? Not really. I think that we should, I don't know, maybe a freeze or something, perhaps. I don't know for sure, Pedro. It's my first time. But I just think it needs to be done. I can tell you that. And other ideas will come, I'm sure, as we speak. But I think maybe, I'm not sure if a freeze would be the idea or not. But it's obvious that some of the homes that are being used or doing the rentals, short-term rentals, are indeed taking away from other homes. We all agree on that.
So I guess, coming back to my thoughts in terms of just, having this discussion continue, I'm really trying to increase the amount of housing in general. And I'm trying to find the most impactful way, and I'm trying to find the way that will be easiest to regulate and to enforce. I've seen in different municipalities, when you start setting caps on short-term rentals and days, it gets very cumbersome for a municipality to keep up with enforcement and regulation. So that's why I'm suggesting we look at and we consider, prohibiting the rental of units, let's say for fewer than 30 days in residential zones, unless it is a primary residence or a secondary unit and a primary residence. So what I'm saying with that is, if we have investment homes right now, if we have properties that are short-term rentals, that are operating as short-term rentals, but they're owned by non-residents, okay, they don't live in Great Barrington. The idea is, if it's regulated, that these people will either, move into the long-term rental arena, or they will sell their house. And that will increase the housing stock. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find, the most impactful way to do that. Now, I know, Pedro, you're not convinced that will happen. So I'm just wondering, what do you think people will do? Let's say this does come on board, and we say that anyone in a residential area that wants to, be a short-term renter has to be a primary residence. What do you think people that are current investors would do with their properties if they were in a residential zone now? Would they just sit on them and not rent them, not sell them, just sit on them and let them? What are you saying? What would happen?
Well, if an investor came in and they bought a house strictly to participate in the short-term rental market, they'll likely sell it.
Okay, so then that addresses the lack of of housing. So that's what I'm trying.
Can I jump in here? Because first of all, there's a huge cost to regulating this, which no one's addressing, which is the cost to the town of the actual regulation. Who regulates it? Who inspects stuff? All of that. Okay,
I have an answer.
Just hang on. And if your data is accurate and the state's is not, that means that 25% of our short-term rentals are not registered. And if I were an LLC with a short-term rental, what would I do? I would just not register it. That's what I would do. And then the town, in order to track that, how does the town do that?
I'm tracking it right now, Jonathan. I'm looking online right now and I can plug in. I have a map in front of me and I can zoom in. I see one that says just available, sparkling 5-bedroom house on the hill. $809 average daily rate. So I can zoom around. So I literally have at my fingertips a way to track it. And there's actually business.
You're going to track it? You're going to track it?
No. What I'm saying is there is
Who's going to track it?
business. There is a business called, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, Granicus, GRANICUS.com. And they specialize in state and local government monitoring and compliance software for Airbnb, VRBO, flip keys style rentals. So what they do specifically is help state and local governments monitor and comply on short-term rentals. So I have a call into them about using them. But the idea is if there are license fees, that this would be self-funding. So any license fees, if it does come to this, would go to using the software, which is only $49 a month, which an intern could look on. I mean, it's very, very at your fingertips. You can it's real time, and you can see exactly where rentals are in Great Barrington. So it doesn't really take that much. Or we could hire this firm. And this is what they do, because there's so many towns right now that are going through what we're going through, that there's actually a business that specifically does that. So I'm not worried about that.
All right, Lee, if I may, I'd like to pull us back a little bit because we've got nothing to regulate at this point.
Yep.
So you're suggesting again that residents should be allowed to rent. Now you keep mentioning this idea of secondary units.
So that would be kind of like a barn or a guest.
Sure. Hold on, let me finish asking the question.
Yep.
So are you suggesting that full-time residents can rent rooms in their primary residence and then rent their secondary residence? Or are you allowing the primary resident to rent their full house for a short term? For example, I live in my house. I want to go away for a week, and in that week, I want to rent it short-term basis. Is that something that you're considering allowing?
In my research, I've seen that I would suggest that you would not be able to rent simultaneously to more than one party under separate contracts. So if
I could rent my house to a family that wants to rent it for a week.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
So I'm not limited to just a secondary unit.
No.
I can rent my primary unit.
Yeah, so if you can rent an ADU on the property as a short-term rental, but if you're like an owner or renter living in an ADU, you can't conduct a short-term rental in the primary structure. So basically, we're saying that you have one contract. So you either rent the whole house under one contract, or ADU if you're living in the primary house, but you wouldn't have multiple contracts.
Somebody who has two properties couldn't rent them both simultaneously.
No, so we're focused on just you have your primary home that you can rent by right. If you have a secondary home or investment property, if it was in a residential zone, you would not be able to rent.
Oh, you're talking about something off my lot, not on the lot, the same lot.
I was talking about the ADU. So if you're something on your lot, so it's two. Are you talking about an ADU that's on the lot?
No, this is why I'm confused. Because to me, an ADU can be somebody's primary residence. So primary, secondary, that's the language I'm caught up in. Yep. Now, are you saying secondary as a separate house on a different lot? Or is it a secondary unit on the same lot?
On the same lot.
On the same lot. So correct. How about if I have a house here, but I also have a house, in Brookside someplace over there. How would I be able to handle my house in Brookside if my primary residence is over here in town?
You would not be able to rent two houses as short-term rentals.
No, but if I'm living in my primary and nobody's living in the other one, I'm just using it right now as a short-term rental. Would I still be able to to take advantage of short-term rentals in that home. Nobody's living in it. It's my secondary home.
No.
No.
No, if
So
you
you
have a
wouldn't be able to
secondary
rent.
home, no. You can rent out your primary home, but not your secondary home.
Okay.
So what I was talking about with ADUs or secondary units, I'm talking about if, let's say you own a house and then you have a barn or you have a guest house, you know, you can rent that as a primary resident, you can rent that out by right. So that's what I'm saying is full-time
Okay.
residents by right can rent up, you know, to, let's say 2 bedrooms in their primary residence or a secondary unit on their property as a short-term rental. So,
All right. So I have a house and I have an ADU and I live in my house
yep,
and I rent my ADU
Yep.
for 2 weeks at a time
yep,
during the summertime.
Yep.
I want to take a trip.
yep.
I want to take a trip in July and be gone for a week. Could I have both of them rented at the same time?
Well, that's up for discussion. What I was going to suggest is that you would only have one contract. So basically, you wouldn't have simultaneous contracts to different parties going on. So, you know, that becomes for what all intents and purposes, that could be like a bed and breakfast. Then we're getting into, you know, bed and breakfast and inn. So, you know, you wouldn't be able to rent simultaneously to more than one party under separate contracts. So if multiple rooms are available.
On the same lot.
If multiple rooms are available, they would be rented together by the same party. You know what I'm saying? So it would be one contract.
So you wouldn't be able to do that on the same one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, any comments on this?
So, I mean, I
This
guess.
seems like this is the crux of what you're proposing. This is it.
I mean, I'm sure there's a better way for me to express this, which I would be happy to write this or send my notes to you. But I guess what I am saying is that if you're not the primary resident, you cannot rent a short-term rental in a residential area. So that's a big change. Then what the thought is if you are, let's say, an investor, you know, when I'm thinking about business districts and mixed use zones and industrial, yes, I think it's okay to let investors to do short-term rental because, you know, we want to keep our downtown vibrant and, you know, we don't want to cut short-term rentals completely off from investors that might add to the vibrancy of a downtown. So that would be something that I would be, you know, willing to delve into further. So if you are an investor, you wouldn't be able to operate a short-term rental in a residential zone, but in a business district or industrial district or mixed use, you could. And maybe that would come with a special use permit that, you know, would be restricted in terms of days. They might have to have inspections. They might have to have, you know, register. So I think that's a whole nother item to be discussed. But
All right. Well, if we can discuss that. So I'm sitting in a mixed use building right now.
Yep.
That has rentals, a whole floor of rentals above me.
Yep.
You know, it sounds like you would be concerned, and I guess I'd be concerned too, if a developer came and I don't think they'd be able to wrest the building from the current owner, but let's just say hypothetically that a developer came and offered an offer that the current owner couldn't refuse and they bought the building.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be a shame to lose all of these rentals that I have above me to short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are already long-term rentals. I mean, my point is that, you know, you're kind of telling people where they can do this kind of business, but in any case, it kind of suggests that there is a potential for rentals that are already in place to be taken off the market.
Well, I think in industrial
Makes
zone
sense.
mixed use, I think that, you know, we don't want to stop economic development and discourage that kind of, you know, downtown activity. So that would be something. So when I talk about, you know, 2 types of licenses, so you would have, you know, a primary residence, excuse me, I'm thinking, you know, a non-primary and a primary. So when it comes to investors, operating short-term rentals in a business zone or district, industrial, that would be a whole different thing to discuss. But, one thing that we need to keep in mind is, really the idea of leveling out the playing field for other types of lodging. So, there's inns and there's bed and breakfasts and there's tourist homes, that abide by inspections and permits and, health and safety regulations. But then, the short-term rentals come in and, they're really, really cutting into their business. So, when you have something like that in your case, Pedro, in your building, I would like to hear from people that are next door at the Barrington House, I believe. How do they feel? Because they're quite regulated, and is that fair? So, I would be open to leveling the playing field out for
Yeah,
that.
I mean, that's,
So,
there's two big questions here that all of us who participate in any type of government have to start, I think, in my opinion, have to start to reckon with. One is that we're always talking about affordable housing. I think if you guys listened to our radio program this week or read the article, we need to start talking more about wages, right? We need, what we're talking about is bringing the cost of housing down. But we're not talking about bringing, the cost of wages up ever. That's the first real problem that I see. And the other thing I see that's a problem has to do with hotels and bed and inns that are highly, highly regulated. So, and it seems like that Boston and I think across the country, they think that the best way for them to get on an equal playing field with the short-term rentals is to bring the short-term rentals up to their standard, which it would be very, very difficult to do. What about talking about bringing the rentals and the hoteliers and not the rentals, but the hoteliers and the bed and breakfast down to the level playing field of the second homeowner who's renting on a short term? This is like a game that it's nonsensical. You'd never be able to get the short-term rental up to that level of a hotel, because, like as Jonathan said, they'll skirt that homeowner, skirt all possible, or all necessary regulations and sign-ups and lists that they would get on, so they wouldn't have to participate. I mean, we're seeing that now potentially, right? People that don't sign up to the registry because they don't want to claim taxes or their short-term rental income as income, or they're, getting around it somehow. So anyway, maybe I'm pontificating a little bit here, but to get back to the point.
yeah, I mean,
I'm not sure if I could, well, just one more thing. I'm not sure that I'd be happy allowing or designating sections of town. I mean, we don't hardly have any, I don't know, John, you can correct me. I don't know that we have any real residences in industrial areas now. And then all the business areas, frankly, are the places where I'm trying to work on through the planning board to get people to live. So I'd be for just not proposing that. I mean,
okay. Yeah. I mean, I was trying to figure out a way to allow for that, because I don't really have a sense of, is this your building that you work in? You're saying that there's lots of short-term rentals. So
there's full-time rentals here.
Oh, there's full-time. Okay.
Yeah, these guys are all long-term
okay,
rentals.
I'm talking about, are there any investors that have purchased these and use it as short-term rentals? I'm assuming.
I don't know, but I can tell you across the street, there's an investor that's from New York City who I'm not sure what kind of luck they're having renting their offices. But if we allowed them, strictly to do short-term rentals in that building, I mean,
yeah, I mean,
that's a good opportunity for them.
It was kind of a concession to commercial investors. So
yeah,
I mean, there are towns that are, banning outright commercial investors from participating in short-term rentals. So I mean, we could go down that. That might be a lot easier. I was just trying to find a way that, has a bit of.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But, I'm not hooked on that. I mean, my thing is really to, as I say, to increase the overall supply. And I absolutely think that, by keeping short-term rentals away from investors in residential areas, that will do that. So that's why I'm looking for the most impactful ordinance that we can do.
All right, so we got an idea on the table here to limit short-term rentals to residents of the town, and to limit their primary residence, their
Yes.
home, as the place to rent, or a secondary residence on their lot, on the same lot, not both of them at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's what we had before us. Do you have any comments?
So again, a primary residence requirement, I was researching that. So that means that in order to register your short-term listing, a person must spend more than 183 days in Massachusetts to meet the definition of a residence, of a residence. So just to clarify that. Then you,
Well, if we,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I just before we start, because that's kind of getting into actually composing the thing, I think, a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it's just in case.
So let's, I just wanted to hear some commentary from the rest of us regarding the main idea, the main thrust here.
Well, if I could, I don't disagree with Lee's hypothesis that short-term rentals are in fact reducing our long-term rental stock and also driving up the cost of housing. I think that's pretty much a given. But I'm not sure that anything that we could do towards regulating short-term rentals is going to have the desired impact. And right now, there are, a significant proportion of buyers will exclude Great Barrington from their search, even though they want to be close to Great Barrington because of taxes. And, if you add taxes, short-term rentals, and lack of fiber, we can't compare with Egremont or Alford or any of the surrounding towns. And that's a problem that we're at the beginning of. It's going to get worse. And, I think we need to think about that, especially if whatever we propose, I'm not saying don't propose anything, but especially if whatever we propose actually doesn't have the desired impact of actually creating more affordable housing or more housing, more market rate housing, more housing in general.
So do you not think, John, that prohibiting non-residents to do short-term rentals who are doing it now will result in more housing on the market?
I certainly wouldn't guarantee that.
What would happen to those properties?
I think a lot of them would just go, they'd go undercovered.
Well, that's when enforcement comes in. That's what we, that to me, looking at this, look on Airbnb and saying, hey, is this registered? I could do a very, very quick search to see if it's a primary residence. Did they pay taxes here? So that to enforce it. And then, the idea is, okay, what are the actual penalties? And if we make it substantial enough, people are not going to do it.
All right, I want to come back to this enforcement topic in a second, but I want to allow Garfield to have any comments on the main idea that Lee's brought forward.
Well, I like the idea. I know it may be difficult to do. I'm not sure if it's going to bring forth the housing we need, but we won't know until we try. I like the basics of the way she wants to do it. I'm in favor of it. Right now, that's where I stand at the moment.
So, John, your thought about the taxes and people's search for housing, how does that play into this discussion?
Well, it's going to have a negative impact potentially. It's going to have a negative impact on housing values because some of the things that are driving housing values are investors. What are you going to do?
housing values, but also housing prices. So you're discouraging, you're making it more out of reach for full-timers to afford properties here. So, there's two sides of the coin. I mean, we're supporting full-time residency by making it more affordable. So you're saying that by discouraging real estate speculation, we're going to be, bringing down the assessment of houses, where I'm saying is that what we're trying to do is support full-time residency and bring more housing stock to the market that full-time residents can afford. So, if we think about, pull back and look at the big picture, what are we trying to do? Are we supporting the real estate speculator or the full-time residents of Great Barrington?
Well, full-time residents want to sell their house sometime. And if it has an adverse impact on the market, then that will have an adverse impact on a full-time resident. I'm not arguing the case. I'm just saying that these are all things that we have to look at.
Well, I mean, if you look around, and Jonathan, being in real estate business, we have severe shortages of staff right now in downtown, particularly, with restaurants and markets and shops. And, a lot of that is because people can't afford to live in Great Barrington. So they're being pushed out into.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that if we increase the housing stock, and I do believe that if we discourage investors, commercial investors who are driving up the cost of rentals and ownership out of reach, if we discourage them from buying properties or keeping their properties that they have in residential areas, they're either going to sell or they're going to move into the long-term rental market. So I don't see how that can be a bad thing.
Or they go underground.
Well,
there's just, there's so many scenarios here. I think, John, somebody who's looking for a home, and they're looking for a home, in South County, and they want to be in Great Barrington, they're going to find a home, or if it's available, they're going to, my point is that people want to be in this town for a reason. Just like they'll want to be in Egremont to not be in such a busy, in a more quiet place, to be in a more quiet place, or Monterey, or wherever it is. There's just so many scenarios here that unfortunately we don't have enough information to
well, I think we
have, but I know we have some information, but it's kind of spotty. For example, the 180 units that you're looking at, like how many of those are primary residents? How many of those are secondary homes? How many of those are secondary homes from people who live in Great Barrington? How many of those secondary homes from people who have invested in? We don't have any of this info, which again is not to say that we shouldn't be talking or putting together a proposal, but it's to say that the question that what we're discussing here has so many unknown variables to it that I think, that we're never going to get to like the truth of what the situation is. So anyway, let's move. If we can move on, unless you have anything else. I gave everybody else a moment.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm just looking at this this app real quick. And you guys have seen this, right? I just want to make sure that I'm referring to something that people.
What's that? The website?
Yeah.
No, I've never seen this website before. I appreciate it.
I haven't seen it either.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing is, because I know when this came up with, and a couple, I think 2 years ago when it was raised to register short-term rentals, I don't know if this was available or we knew about it. And at that point, it seemed quite cumbersome to, for us to do the manual labor of, checking VRBO and Airbnb and doing this kind of sleuthing. But the fact is that this exists now, and there's others out there. So in terms of enforcing and regulating it, I think we're in a much better position than we were a few years ago. So I think,
But we do have our resident town administrator here with us today. Chris, you have any ideas on how protocol could be set up to regulate this stuff?
Yeah, and before I go on, Pedro, you can see the attendees list, right? It's up to you whether or not you want to invite folks to talk, but Ed Abrams' hand is probably getting tired by now. There are, for folks in the audience, 8 people in the audience, just so you know. It's a good discussion, and it's important to bring all these issues to the table. There might be a variety of factors you want to consider, and there may be a variety of impacts, some of which you may never know, even with using websites like AirDNA, or there's others out there, Host Compliance and others that are frequently used. But getting at the numbers, I think, is important, whether you want to make a case to the voters or track this on an ongoing basis. So whether we use AirDNA or whether we budget for, and Lee, it's great if you look into this, the cost of this sort of thing, if we budget, you know, on a yearly basis for, you know, purchasing a service who will track what sort of short-term rentals are out there on the internet, you know, their characteristics, et cetera. And if we can figure out how to, if this is one of your goals, if we can figure out how to tie those to full-time residents or investor properties, I think that will help us understand the dynamics a little bit more. I do think it's probably true, I think you all agree that it's probably true that investor-owned properties are taking, for the most part, are investing in properties for short-term rental benefits and not for generally not to be landlords for long-term residents. So I think that does take units off the market. And I agree with Pedro that, you know, more housing in general is better and will cycle the housing stock. There's a 0% rental vacancy rate. The housing vacancy rate is really low for homeownership housing as well. And if you don't have housing stock cycling through the system, it's not a healthy ecosystem, if you will. So understanding the dynamics that I think is important. How the town would administer this, I don't know. We'd have to talk about the impacts. You know, if we're tracking this ourselves, if we're relying on the state's registration database that has its problems, it's easy for us to access, but it has its problems because not everybody's registering. Some of those are underground. It's equally problematic to use AirDNA or Host Compliance company because it's kind of a black box. We don't know how they're doing it. You know, we don't. It's a proprietary system. We don't know if it's garbage in, garbage out data or what. So we just have to go with what's available, I think. So whether it's using databases that are out there or using our own staff, I think that's an impact either way. If we do start to look at code compliance, building code, health code, et cetera, that's a lift even further for staff and inspections. And that's probably one that we wouldn't be able to meet as a town without a significant investment in people, in new staff. That's a tough lift, and it's a tough job to do, to inspect rentals and make sure they're up to code. A lot of what you're talking about, whether you're regulating what can go on in different districts or how long a short-term rental can be, that sounds like a zoning bylaw as opposed to a general bylaw, so you have to think about that. It's probably a 2/3 vote at town meeting. What else? Did I answer your question, Pedro?
Yeah, I was just curious if we had any kind of infrastructure in place right now that could take on one extra task.
We do not.
But so it would have to be either, I don't know, position created or like on a part-time basis or something like that.
Yeah, we'd have to be creative.
Right.
And Chris, what is the town currently charging for room tax on short-term rentals?
I believe it's 6% or 6.25%. I can't remember exactly, but it's the same that you would pay as if you were in a regular hotel. It's the same room tax.
Because the state law allows the town to raise that.
We have
For
the
sure,
max,
for sure,
whatever it
for
is.
sure.
I think it's 6%. We're at the max.
The room occupancy excise rate is 5.7%. This is in the housing study. So
We
that's
charge
that.
the max, so whatever it is.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And then
So-
there's also a community impact fee that the town can charge.
Correct.